Hey, folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully, that can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, we're going to be having Kate Douglas from Keeper's Heart join us. Hopefully you guys will enjoy the conversation that we have today. This morning or afternoon, I have Kate from Keeper's Heart joining us. Kate, thank you for hopping on. I always appreciate anytime when somebody will give me their time, because time is the only thing we can't make more of. It's the only non-renewable resource, and it's incredibly valuable. So I appreciate you hopping on. Just kind of give me the 30 seconds to a minute version of who Kate is.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me first and foremost. So my name is Kate Douglas. I'm one of the lead distillers here at O'Shaughnessy Distilling Company. We make Keeper's Heart. Our main focus is triple pot distillation. So if you look behind me, those are beautiful triple pots, making classic Irish style whiskey, as well as more traditionally American whiskeys, but distilled in the Irish style. We also have a column still, so lots of flexibility here at O'Shaughnessy. And Keeper's Heart is a blend of Irish and American whiskeys, which is really fun to play with. And I've been in the industry for almost 9 years now.
9 years. So you started off as a student at Colorado State, and you work your way into distilling. How? Because I think about my path in college, right? And that wasn't really an opportunity, but I'm quite a bit older than you. So, those type of things, those programs didn't necessarily exist. And, people immediately assume, a college kid wanting to go into distilling makes a ton of sense, right? Because it's the integral part of it. But like, how did you get into this?
Yeah, well, it wasn't a thing when I started school either. So there's that. I was in the first graduating class of the program at Colorado State. So I initially went to school as a chemistry major, didn't love it, I knew that to be a chemistry major and to do something, you got to get like your master's and then your PhD. And I really didn't want to be in school for that long. And the reason I went into chemistry is because I loved baking, I loved cooking, I loved kind of the flavor science of it all. And so I switched majors, then I studied abroad, and when I got back, they had opened up this fermentation science and technology program. So I looked into that, and it was, food fermentation. So you were making kimchi, sauerkraut, sourdough, kombucha, cheese, sausage, talking about chocolate. It was fermentation microbiology, so looking at all of what goes on in your gut and how fermentation plays a role. It was food chemistry. It was a lot of brewing. Being in Fort Collins, there are lots of breweries. It is a very beer-focused town. CSU had a brewing class for, I don't know, probably like 10 years before the program actually got started. And I was very intrigued because it was really finally combining the food and the science that I really wanted. And so, the program opened up in 2013. Our first graduating class, there was, I want to say like maybe 7 of us. And we were definitely the guinea pigs for a lot of those classes. The program has changed quite a bit. I mean, there's an engineering class that goes into it now, and some really, really cool stuff. They've got like a full brew lab where there's a 2 hectoliter brew system, full quality lab, full analytical lab that wasn't there when I was there. And then they've got the brewery in the pub on campus as well that program runs. So it has definitely grown quite a bit.
That does sound, and I can only imagine at this point, right? You're wishing maybe there probably was some engineering classes whenever you're doing this, because moving into at least alcohol distillation, every single time I go to any distillery, it's like, hey, I learned, uh, mechanical engineering on the fly because I had to for adjustments for stills or whatever.
100%.
And I really like this point. You went into chemistry because you like baking and cooking, and I too enjoy cooking, and it makes a lot of sense, right? Like baking is the physical sort of understood chemistry. You very much, this much plus this much equals that, and then cooking is more maybe experimental chemistry, where it's like, let's put these things together and see what happens next.
Totally,
Um,
absolutely.
as you're kind of walking through this program at Colorado State, was the end goal beer? Was the end goal in something else in food, or was the end goal
Mhm.
unknown because you're in
It was
college and you don't
unknown.
have to yet?
It was definitely unknown. I wasn't sure kind of where it was going to go. I mean, at that point, there were starting to be more craft distilleries. I know I talked to um, Copper Muse, which is a distillery. They focus mostly on rum in Fort Collins that I had considered doing an internship with, and then they decided they weren't going to have an intern. And I mean, I guess I really thought that I was going to go into the beer world, maybe do, QA, QC stuff there. And then, like most career paths, it's a lot of it is kind of who random situations. And I had worked at Target during part of my college career, and I had to do some shopping, so I went back, and I wasn't working there at the time, but I ran into my old boss, and she was just asking how things were, what was I doing. And I told her that I was looking for an internship in something fermentation related, and her eyes got wide, and she's like, oh my gosh, my boyfriend is a distiller and he could really use an intern. Like, is it okay if I give him your phone number? And I was like, is it okay? Are you kidding me? I'm a college student. Like, I yes, please, here's my, like, absolutely, please, please,
Mhm.
please. And so I met with Chris Silber, who I conveniently get to work with again here at O'Shaughnessy. And he was working at Old Elk Distillery there in Fort Collins. And I went through the interview process and everything, and I started my internship the Monday after graduation.
And internships always have felt like that thing. It's like, you said the rum distillery decided they weren't going to do one. And like, usually you don't pass up on, free labor that you can somewhat abuse, right? Like that's what interns are usually for. It's like,
Well,
you're going to,
luckily, this was a paid internship, which was great.
oh, that,
Yeah,
that is,
it was a
you still get
win.
the abuse, but maybe you get, a
Mhm,
little bit of compensation for it.
mhm.
Um, Kind of as you've progressed through your career, right? You're now in a situation where you're making an Irish American blend of whiskeys. As you entered into distilled spirits, as you entered into whiskey, did you ever think it would be anything like this degree of innovation, or you just,
No,
you know, where the wind takes you?
no. I mean, it was very much where the wind takes me. I mean, I thought distilling was cool because it was taking everything that I learned in school of brewing one step further into distillation. And then I started doing some more research. I wanted to learn more. So after I got hired on as a distiller with Old Elk, I started the diploma in distilling from the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, which is based out of the UK, I think technically Scotland. Um, and I was doing one of the modules with one of my coworkers there at the time, and it just opened my eyes so much into what's happening during the distillation process, and then taking that another step further into maturation. And like the magic of maturation just sucked me in, and that was like, okay, this is so cool. Like, this is my career. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah, and it's no wonder that this is, viewed as maybe modern alchemy at this point. Being a distiller, you often end up having to wear this other hat of blender, right? Which was maybe not a part of the training. Um, do you see that as like a fun extra thing you get to do, or like is there one part of it you like better, or is it just the combination of the two things, both blending and distilling, that
I mean, I
um,
think the combination is really cool. Um, before coming to O'Shaughnessy, I was very much, at Old Elk, we didn't have a large production facility. It was rather small. And my role had really turned into blending. So I was
mhm,
blending all of the, different whiskeys that they produce. And um, like that was very eye-opening because, everyone's palate is different. Blending is truly an art form. And I really enjoyed it, but I wanted to understand distilling on a larger scale, which is ultimately what brought me here to O'Shaughnessy and to Keeper's Heart, and working with Brian and learning from Brian on a classic, pot still style of distillation. Um, and when Chris told me that, yeah, they're going to do an Irish American blend, I was very intrigued because at the time I was only blending, like spirits.
mhm.
I wasn't blending, multiple categories together. So that was very intriguing. And, I signed up, I accepted the job before actually tasting the whiskey. And was just very curious as to how it would work out. And I think Brian did a great job with the Irish American blend because it's so unique and so versatile. And I mean, there are times where a batch of, rye whiskey that we get in is slightly different than the previous batch. And so as blenders, we are blending to a flavor profile, not just a recipe. And I mean, I can work with 1/4% and have it be different. So getting the distillation knowledge, and just how different whiskey coming off the still is compared to whiskey coming out of the barrel is really cool. So I love having both ends of the spectrum because you truly get to appreciate what's happening during that maturation process.
So, you had the opportunity to do some blending in your prior position, and now you're blending two completely different spirits. And you already said, are there parts of that previous experience that helped you in understanding how these two spirits are going to come together because you were blending like spirits before and now you're not?
I mean, I think it was definitely great knowledge to have in my pocket. It's blending is so fascinating because you can take 30 barrels made from the same batch, and depending on where they were aged in the warehouse, they're going to have a slightly different flavor profile. So, you got to taste each barrel and make notes, and then having them be blended together doesn't always blend the way that you think it would. Um, and I think that was something that really helped me with coming to Keepers because you taste the three different components by themselves and you're like, how on earth is this going to work out? And the Irish grain whiskey is very light and delicate and citrus forward. It's very sweet. Then you've got the pot still, which is a little bit more savory, a little bit more earthy, spicy, and that blends really well with the rye. So I think it definitely helped. And of course, I wasn't around for the blend of the Irish American when it came to be, but I was for the Irish plus bourbon, which was really cool because I got to take that bourbon knowledge that I had from blending in my previous role and sit down with Brian Nation and David Perkins and create this new incredible blend, which I really love. I'm a big fan of bourbon, so making that product was really cool.
So there's a couple different ways. I'm trying to figure out which way I want to go next on this. So you mentioned you're blending to a flavor profile, and I've talked to a number of people, and this is um, my dad homebrewed beer for, like before it was cool, when you still had to, like, get a catalog and order it through the mail, and then your 5 gallon bucket would show up and all of your ingredients and whatnot. And he always kind of, held up, the people like, Miller Lite or Coors or Anheuser-Busch are probably some of the strongest beer producers, because they make the exact same thing every single can for the last 20 years. And,
Mhm.
there's this concept of flavor drift that occurs in whiskey. So when you guys blend to a flavor profile, are you looking at the previous batch, or are you looking 3 batches back, or do you have like a source of like the mother spirit, and like, this is the one we're all always gauging against it?
Yeah, I mean, we do keep archives of each of our blends, so we'll keep at least a case of each blend, so that we always have something to go back and reference. Um, and then with our archives, we pull a sample of each component at full strength, and then the blend at full strength, and the blend proof down. So we keep really good records to make sure that everything does match. And like I said, there are times where it doesn't. And so you're playing with, maybe it's taking 0.5% of rye out. And then how do you make that up with the other spirit in order to match that flavor profile? And like you were saying, I mean, the big guys have the upper hand because they're producing in such large volumes. Not only are they just producing, the same thing over and over again, but they're also producing at such a large scale that, like, with whiskey, the larger the number of barrels that you can blend together, the more consistent it's going to be.
Hmm.
When you're doing smaller batches, it can get a little goofy. You can have one barrel that might throw the whole batch off. And so that's why we taste everything before we blend it together, and then multiple times while it's being blended, while it's being proofed, so that we know, like, if we need to adjust, we can, and we can look at multiple batches.
So that's I'm glad you said that, because I've started thinking about this. When you do your blend, do you proof down the spirit then blend it, or do you blend it and then proof it down, or is it or is everything coming in neutral and you're just blending it together to see what happens?
We will blend it at full strength. And we don't blend based on volume. We blend based on proof gallons, and we do that by weight because it's more consistent and more accurate. Because ultimately you're dealing with densities, and each spirit is going to have slightly different. So there's a lot that goes into it, and I won't bore you too much with it. But so we will blend everything at full strength and then proof it down.
It wouldn't bore me too much, because I will tell you, last week I had maybe a 2-hour conversation on the difference between density and specific gravity / relative gravity in liquids for conversions, just for my day job and doing something completely different. So I'm with you on that, but I also understand how some people are like, I don't care about that part nearly as much.
There are times where I'll say that and the person's face just goes blank.
Yeah,
I'm like, all right, let's move on.
Yeah, because density and gravity may be different.
Yeah.
So when you do build, kind of your test blend, how long do you let that blend sort of like marinate before you do taste, or you do it immediately and then again and again and again, or?
So we will typically blend and then taste to see what that blend is like right at the blend. And we never will, like, we won't typically bottle right then. Like, once it's blended and proofed, we'll let it sit and marry for a couple days typically. And that's just with our setup, that's what we're able to do. I mean, there eventually I would like for smaller projects, we will typically take a little bit longer, because it does make a difference.
Mhm.
So it really just depends on what product we're doing.
Gotcha. Well, and so we've sort of danced around this. I guess maybe we need to kind of take a few steps backwards. Let's talk about the actual brand, right? So, the Keeper's Heart. I don't know that we've actually I don't know that I've said the name yet, maybe except for at the very beginning. So,
Okay,
you work for Keeper's Heart. Tell me a little bit about this. Aside from, we talked a little bit about it being an Irish / American or Irish / bourbon blend. Give me the elevator speech on Keeper's Heart.
Oh man, I'm so bad at elevator speeches because I can just go on and on and on. But so we've got, two mainstays, two flagships basically. So we've got the Keeper's Heart Irish Plus American, which is a blend of 4-year Irish grain whiskey, 4-year Irish pot still whiskey, and 4-year American rye. It is definitely more Irish forward compared to American forward. But it's a really nice, just like introductory, or like getting people to who might mostly focus on rye kind of go into the Irish category. Brian always says, we're Irishizing American whiskey, Americanizing Irish whiskey. But it really is just a beautiful, versatile product. And then we've got the Irish Plus Bourbon, which I think I mentioned earlier. This one is a blend of the same two Irish whiskey. So the 4-year Irish pot still, 4-year Irish grain, this time with 4-year bourbon. And this one was created for the bourbon drinkers. So it's more bourbon forward. It's a slightly higher proof. And, it's something that when we got started hadn't really been done prior to, right after Prohibition, when the Jameson family was trying to kind of get some of that American market back, and it didn't last. I mean, I think they pulled it out before World War II, and so it was something that really wasn't done before. David Perkins, when he was at High West, had done some, Scotch with American whiskey, and maybe that's why he decided to to come be a liquid collaborator with us. But it's just a really cool thing that you don't see a lot of. Nowadays, you're starting to see more brands combining Irish and American whiskeys together, and we just always chalk that up to what's more flattering than having someone try and replicate it.
Yeah,
So
imitation is the sincerest form of flattery for sure.
that's what I was looking for. That's the
Yeah.
phrase.
Yeah. And I enjoy a couple of different things. Yes, Scotch and bourbon has tried to be blended together, but I don't think you can find maybe two groups of spirits consumers that are more territorial about what is their home spirit than anything else. And trying to mash those two together is maybe like trying to have American football and English football in the exact same bar at the same time. It's not going to go super well, at least not initially. But the initial approach for Keeper's Heart was American whiskey, specifically being rye whiskey and Irish. And I think that feels more appropriate because it is two groups of people that maybe aren't as beholden to the history of it, right? Because Irish whiskey has had independent bottlers and blending and all of these things for a long time, and so this is nothing new to them. And there's not a ton of people that were just explicit rye fans, and I think they played well together. Getting the bourbon people here, I think the blend gets there, right? Because it does touch on some of the things that bourbon fans really, really like, but it adds in a light nature that bourbons can beat you over the head with flavor profiles. I could talk about that probably for a while, but that'll definitely get kind of way down the rabbit hole. So I guess right now you guys will blend these things together to generate the final output. Right now it is Irish plus American whiskey, then it's Irish plus bourbon. Are there any thoughts about other spirits blendings like Irish or Scotch or like any of those other things, or is this kind of the mainstays of what Keeper's Heart's going to do?
I mean, these are kind of the mainstays right now. Ultimately, the whole reason why the blends exist is to get us to the point where we can release our own distillate. And I mean, having those pot stills is incredible because there aren't many distilleries here in the US that have those, that are doing this style. And that's, I mean, really why Brian decided to leave Ireland was to have the opportunity to create something new. His history as master distiller at Irish Distillers. I mean, that's not typically a job that you leave from. It's a job that you retire from. So it really did shake up the whiskey world when he decided to leave. And I mean, we've had to modify our pot still in order to do some of the things that we're doing. We've done 100% rye whiskey, triple pot distilled, which is amazing. But we had to change how that wash still is heated, because you're not going to do grain off rye whiskey. Like, rye is such a pain that we had to make it so that we could do grain on distillation in the pot stills, which a lot of the times you'll get this terrible scorching flavor coming through. So we put in a reboiler for our pot still. And, that way you have that constant mechanical agitation. It's a different form of heating. And that distillate is so good. It is so good. It's aging really nicely. Then we did a triple pot distilled bourbon. And, bourbon especially, we were told, once you get that corn in, it's going to scorch and you're not going to be able to get it out. And we haven't had any issues with that. And again, the distillate is beautiful. And so really, I mean, innovation has been such a huge thing with what we've done here at O'Shaughnessy. And the blends are just like a toe in the water, It's showing that blending is also an art form, but it's really just leading way to the innovative spirits that we're going to have coming out of here in a few years.
So that I'm glad you brought those up, because those are much farther down my list of questions that I had here. And you specifically are doing 100% rye, and the mash bill on the bourbon is different than the mash bill that you're using. Was the intent because you want to own your flavor profile, or like, I guess what put you in a position where you're going from these other two mash bills to these new mash bills that you're actually making for yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, the blends, the Irish plus American, the Irish plus bourbon, those will always be blended, likely with, we'll always have to source whiskey for those. On our column still, we are making a, bourbon that has the same mash bill of what we're sourcing right now. We've got a column rye that is slightly different. Again, it's 100% rye instead of the 95.5, which is in the Irish American. So we potentially down the road will be able to use our own distillate for those blends, but the stuff coming off the pot stills will be a different label. They'll never go in, well, at this point, they would never be destined to go into one of the Irish American blends. And it, so yes, we have the availability. No, it's not going to be from the pot stills though.
So, how long? This is the question that everyone probably always asks. Like, do you have a bottom end threshold of how old it at minimum is going to be before your own distillate hits the marketplace?
I mean, we're pushing for 4 years.
4 years.
So our American pot still, which is that classic Irish style of 50% malted barley, 50% unmalted barley, lautered, fermented off grain, distilled off grain. That was our first recipe that we did. And I think our first barrel was September 30th of 2021. So we aren't planning on releasing that this year. It'll be, late next year, before that's ready to go. The thing about whiskey is it takes time. And I know there are a lot of methods of, how to speed up the aging process. But people have been trying to speed it up for almost 100 years. And I haven't tasted something that I would say, yes, that's exactly like a 4-year or 6-year, when it's been shorter. And, a lot of that comes down to the chemistry of what's happening in the barrel. The first couple of years, it's going to be mostly extracting different flavors, different compounds from the wood itself. And then you start to get into more of those oxidative reactions where, maybe a wood sugar is reacting with the different compounds from the distillate, the oxygen, the alcohol, and that's going to, eventually years down the road turn into this fig flavor or this tobacco flavor. But the fact of the matter is, you can't really speed that up. Um, you know, it that's also why you get such big variations in warehouses, because
Mhm.
your temperature is going to change. So a lot of the times, in colder climates, we will climate control a little bit. We don't want it to get too cold in the winter, so we've got to, it's got to be at least 60 degrees in the winter, and then in the summer it's a free for all. But we don't want to release anything before it's ready.
Yeah. And that's,
Lots of
that usually ends up being everybody's, like, it's ready when it's ready. But
yeah.
I know a lot of brands will set, we're not going to do it before this time frame,
Mhm.
because it is, and you mentioned that, there's a lot of people that have tried to speed up the aging process. And I've always kind of viewed it as like just differently age, not faster. Right. Because if you put it in a smaller barrel, it's not going to age faster. It ages different, because that's just not how science works. Right.
Yeah.
The ratio of wood to liquid, it's all a different sort of
Mhm.
setup. So you guys have things that you're aging on your own. What kind of barrels do you guys use? Full
Uh,
format, or
so, I mean, most of the time we'll use medium plus toast number 3 char for most of our distillate. We do also like to sometimes play. So, because we're harvesting, bourbon and rye, for some of our recipes, we've put that distillate into used barrels to kind of emulate more of that Irish style. Because, in Ireland, that's what they do. It's
yeah,
used barrels. They get all their barrels from the US, and will age multiple times in a used barrel. So um, you might as well try it, right?
right. I mean, what's the use in having stills if you can't at least do some degree of experimentation?
Totally.
And wood is just one of those factors.
Hmm.
So you have the triple pot distilled rye, the triple pot distilled bourbon. Both of those are aging at a period of time. When you do a triple pot distillation, you have three right behind you. Is it in sequence, or are you distilling, cooling, distilling, cooling? Like, does it actually run in sequence like that?
So I mean, the pot stills is going to be batch distillation. So we'll start with this middle one is our wash still. That's where we're taking the fermented distiller's beer or wash from the brew house. We'll pump that in, heat it up, cool it down. Then we're collecting our low wines, which is, it's more of a hard and fast distillation. It's going to be really oily. You're really just separating your volatiles from your non-volatiles. Then we'll go. I'm reversed in my camera, so then we'll go to our faint still, and that is where we're going to start to get picky. So low wines come off the still aggregate is about 40 proof. Um, in our faint still, we will separate based off proof. So we'll get our strong faints at 125 proof. Strong faints move on. Weak faints, which is anything below that threshold, that becomes a nice little recycling product. So it'll get recycled into the next faints run, which also helps with our consistency. Strong faints go into the spirit still, and that's when you start really getting picky. That's where you're going to separate your heads, hearts, and tails. And I mean, the distillate coming off, you have 40 proof, and really it starts coming off the still at a like 110 proof.
Mhm.
Faint still is going to start coming off at closer to 150 proof. Spirit still, you're going to pop off at like 170 proof.
Mhm.
um, and when the spirit still starts up, when you're collecting hearts, the aroma in the still house is just incredible. Like, exactly what's going on. It's sweet, it's beautiful. um, And so while it's not a continuous side of things, you are heating and cooling, heating and cooling, heating and cooling. It's a really fun process to see. And then because you're only taking fractions of each still, you do have to run this middle still a couple times before you have enough liquid to go to the faint still. You got to do that a couple times before you have enough for the spirit still. So it is definitely like a more labor time intensive process compared to our continuous distillation where you're pumping the beer in and you're getting spirit out.
Yeah. So my brain would have immediately said it's going to be 1, 2, 3, right? In order, 1, 2, 3. But you're doing middle, and you're doing this side, and then you're doing that side, right?
And typically in Irish whiskey distilleries, it is a 1, 2, 3 setup. But the middle still is slightly larger. And so the
Gotcha.
design team wanted that one to be in the
It
middle.
goes in the middle. Like, for if you're gonna sit in you're sitting in the area where you can sit down and have
Yeah,
cocktails.
I'm sitting in the wall.
Yeah,
That's the bar.
if it wasn't, every moderately OCD person would have a fit, right? If you had the big one on the left hand side and everything else was on the right, they'd be like, "Hey, why is it not in the middle?" Right? That's
Yeah.
where it makes sense. Design team's right. I get that. It makes tons of sense. So you come off the still, you go into your cooperage, which is medium toast, number 3 char, sometimes use barrels, and you're aging it. So this is for your distillate that you're making, right? Kind of walking backwards, for your Irish plus American and your Irish plus bourbon, you're getting already aged spirits to blend together.
We are. Yeah.
Um, do you guys reuse those barrels as a part of it, or is that what, when you talk about used barrels, are you using the ones that you've brought in because you've brought in? I assume sometimes you're bringing in barrels, sometimes you're bringing in probably totes or whatever. Um, so you are reusing some of those barrels. That's what you're saying.
Yes. Yes. And we reuse them either, for our new distillate or for finishing Keeper's Heart. So like we will have a Keeper's Heart Irish plus American single barrel finish where we've done used rye. So you put that blend, uncut. So it's just the Irish grain, Irish pot still, American rye, and you put that back into a barrel that held the rye whiskey already. And that product is really fun because it's kind of, going back to my cooking brain, it's like making a soup with chicken stock instead of water. You're automatically going to have that amplification of flavor. And it's also going to kind of like mellow things out a little. You're marrying it a bit more. And it's just a richer, bolder, slightly more spicy because it's rye flavor profile. It's delicious though.
Yeah, and so that answered one of the questions I had way later on, is that you guys do single barrels on the Keeper's Heart stuff, which means it had to be rebarreled once you've sort of blended it together. Do you guys do double oaking at all, where you take that blend and then put it in another brand new barrel and see what happens?
We have. So that's kind of our virgin American oak finish. And that's been really fun. I mean, Brian likes to play. And so that was one of the first ones we did. And, it kind of just reiterated the fact of how barrels are. I mean, barrels, I like to equate them to tea bags. The first, like you take a bag of tea, you put it in a hot cup of water, you're going to get this rich, bold extraction, dark in color. You take that same bag of tea, put it in another cup of hot water, and it's not going to be as strong. It's not going to be as bold. You're going to get different flavors coming through. So taking Keeper's Heart and putting it into the virgin oak versus the used rye, you get very different flavor profiles. And watching, some of those virgin oak finishes, 3 months compared to 7 months compared to 2 years. You get to see the evolution of the maturation process, in something different than new make. And it's been really fun to see it go from, very oak forward to, yes, you're getting more oak, but you're also getting more complexity as well.
So So you guys do you do a version of barrel finishing, but do you do, like the traditional version of barrel finishing where you have the opportunity to do wines or other spirits that are not what you have?
Yes. We earlier this month we released the Keeper's Heart Irish plus American in orange PX sherry barrels. Um, and that one was fascinating because when we first got offered these barrels, we are like, well, what the heck is that? And it's a PX sherry, and they rested on these orange peels for 8 months. And I've always loved PX barrel finishes, but the orange sherry was holy moly, like delicious. Um, so that's been really fun. We've done Madeira, we've done Tokai, we've done a Cabernet finish, which went over really well. We also, Surly Brewing is right next door to us, and so we did a Surly Darkness finish, and that one has evolved incredibly from 3 months where you get more of that coffee flavor, a little bit of bitterness coming through, to the older products where it's more chocolate forward. Um, so it's been really fun to play, and we've had a lot of opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I assume darkness is either a stout or a porter or something that's
Yeah,
super thick. And that, as soon as you said it, I was like, that.
imperial stout.
Yeah, that's. I'm a sucker for a stout finish any day of the week for sure.
Mhm.
You guys like to experiment, right? And has there been a American bourbon, Irish, all four components blended together version of it yet? Is that a
You know,
thing, or is
I don't think we've tried it. Originally when Brian was still in Ireland and working on the blends, or the initial Keeper's Heart Irish plus American blend, um, ideally he wanted to do, I think, bourbon and pot still, Irish pot
Mhm.
still. And he was blending just the two of those together, and it just wasn't giving him what he wanted. So then the supply of bourbon was tight at that point in time. So that's why he started experimenting more with rye, and even just the rye and the pot still together weren't quite working as well as he wanted to. And it was at that point that he brought in the Irish grain whiskey, which was a total game changer. Um, and really shows his skill in blending, because now we offer a blending class where people can come in. I think it's like every other Saturday or something, and they can try blending, rye, pot still, and grain together. And there, I have tried, and sometimes it just doesn't work.
Right?
Even with working on the Irish plus bourbon blend, there are things that you think would be delicious that just aren't. Um, and I don't think we've tried doing all four distillates together.
Mhm.
Might be a fun little project.
Yeah, and you touched on this, and this is something that I always, when people are blending different spirits together, I always, being the geographically remote person, like, hey, when are we going to get a chance to buy the individual components and do a DIY? But the key is you don't buy the individual components. You go to the distillery and you take the class, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the goal.
Yeah. And like after every tour, you finish with a component tasting. So we focus on the Irish plus American. So you try the 4-year Irish grain by itself, then the 4-year Irish pot still by itself, and the 4-year American rye by itself. Um, and when we started doing that, it was so cool and so eye opening, because then it allows the consumers to really understand what whiskey is giving you what flavor profile.
Mhm.
And so we'll take that on the road sometimes, and it's a really cool way to understand the whiskey more, and to get, I mean, a lot of the times you don't typically see Irish grain whiskey on the market.
Mhm.
You just don't. So a lot of people don't even understand what that product is and what that means. So, when people sit down and they get this very sweet, delicate citrus, like almost honeysuckle flavor coming off the whiskey, they're like, well, what? Like, I don't even know what this is. It's like, well, that's the Irish grain whiskey. And then, once you get down to the blend itself, they're like, I get that grain whiskey on this part of the flavor profile or this part of the nose. And so a lot of it's, education based, which is one thing that Brian has always been very adamant on is, education is a very big part of our tours of what we're especially with a new category of whiskey. Education is always going to be a part of our story.
Yeah, distillery tours are sort of a dime a dozen, but the opportunity to understand blending is a different creature in and of itself. And I kind of look at it the same way that I think what they should. You've probably heard this before, but I think like, think about the Olympics. Every Olympic event should have just like one normal person that competes alongside the Olympic athletes, right?
Yeah.
Because we watch and we're like, oh, it just barely missed it, but then you compare it against like just me, right? Like trying to do a somersault. It sort of adds that context. And in the same way, like these opportunities to do blending in the United States is taking a turn. I think, people are starting to respect it more, but 5-7 years ago, it was almost a dirty word in the spirits industry, but sitting down with the components and saying, all right, now I'm going to put this together myself starts to help you understand, unless you just happen to be a phenom, it's not going to work out super well. And so you start understanding the artistry and the work that goes into making these things work well together, where the blend of the components are greater than the individual pieces, right? Because most of the time, if you take all the colors and you mix them together, you don't end up with a better color than what the individual colors were, right? Like everybody did that with the watercolors when they were a kid. It never turned out a beautiful color. So the opportunity to do that blend, to understand the component parts and the artistry, that it makes a lot of sense for the American consumer to kind of adjust into a better understanding of what goes on into that. And one of the other things that I came across on the website is there was an Irish single malt, like a 10-year that you guys did. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So that one we're very proud of, because last year it won, best Irish whiskey in the world. And for a while you couldn't even get it in Ireland. But yeah, so Brian chose a 10-year single malt that he really enjoyed. But one thing about what we do is typically we don't like to just, take someone else's product and just re-release it and not do anything to it typically. And so he knew, single malts can get a little bitter. And so he wanted to finish it in something sweet. And I love the story behind why it's finished in Malaga. And I'll share that with you. It was after Brian had met the O'Shaughnessy's, he still wasn't quite sure if they were going to move their family to Minneapolis, of all places. And he was kind of going back and forth. And he went on a vacation with his wife, Una, to Malaga. And Una was very specific in saying, do not bring anything work related. Brian's like, oh, okay, yeah, no, of course not. I would never do something like that. But he brought his little notebook that had pros and cons of moving to Minneapolis versus staying. And, they're in this beautiful part of Spain, drinking this delicious Malaga wine. And Una just kind of got fed up with it and took his notebook and threw it, across the ground and was like, okay, we're going. Decision is made. We are moving to Minneapolis. And so finishing in Malaga was a nice little homage to his wife. And, it blends so nice. Like the flavors just blend so nicely. You get, this beautiful marzipan flavor coming over, this chocolate covered cherry flavor. It's a really gorgeous product. And so we, will, and of course, because it's an Irish single malt, it has to be produced in Ireland. That's from, the brewing, the fermentation, distillation, maturation, harvesting, all has to be done over there. So luckily Brian does go back pretty often and can check on everything. And then we get the finished liquid and we proof it down and bottle it here in Minnesota.
So, and that begs the question, and this may seem sacrilegious, this may seem like heresy at this point, but you have this 10-year Irish whiskey. Have you considered trying to find a corollary 10-year rye or 10-year bourbon and do like an advanced age Irish plus American or whatever? I mean, we're talking premium at this point, obviously.
Yeah, yeah. Not that I know of, honestly. Not that I know of. I mean, we do have like all of our standard stock over in Ireland that, we potentially could let age a little bit longer and do the same thing here. We just haven't yet.
Yeah.
Maybe
And I mean,
that'll be
if you let
line.
if you let the whiskey nerds kind of run rampant, they'll have you in all of the premium experiments that may end up
Oh, yeah.
turning out terrible, and you have to eat so much money. But we always ask the questions, right? Because that's what we do. And I think we touched on it just briefly, but we're pushing up on time. Um, I don't know that we've talked significantly about the on-site. You guys do have tours, you have a blending experience, but kind of give me the rundown. I want to understand Keeper's Heart, so I need to come to Minneapolis. I need to fly in. Tell me about your on-site experience.
Yeah, I mean, the distillery is incredible. The O'Shaughnessy's really built it because they wanted to build a place where their family could come and be together. I mean, that's where this whole dream started, was at a family reunion. And everyone was drinking Irish whiskey and they're like, oh, we should make a distillery. And while most people the next morning think, oh, that's a terrible idea, the O'Shaughnessy's were like, no, actually, that's a pretty good idea. And so they went forward with this venture and created Keeper's Heart, built the distillery. And so, we offer tours, I think it's Wednesday through Sunday. And they're very education based, thanks to Brian's input. And you really get to see, you see packaging, you see brewing, fermentation, distillation. The nice thing about being in a distillery versus a brewery is we can open up our fermenters. So you can smell the difference between a brew that had been done that day and fermentation might not have gotten started yet. It's going to smell very sweet, versus a fermentation that is fully attenuated and ready to go to the stills, and you get a lot more sour compounds. You get some fruitiness that comes over, and so you get to experience that, and then go over and learn the basics of the pot still distillation, the column distillation. The education spot down by maturation is really cool because we've got these big, beautiful wood boards that break down kind of the process, and then a really cool display of angel share, and kind of talk about that, and then finish with the component tasting. You obviously do not have to go on a tour to come see us. I'm sitting in our whiskey lounge right now, even though it's lights aren't on or anything. But it's a great place to sit and eat. We have a full kitchen. That the food is absolutely delicious, and a lot of the times, an aspect of the food will use the whiskey. The steak tips are very popular, and that's I think marinated in the Irish plus bourbon, or it's used in the sauce or something. The whiskey ice cream is delicious. In the summer, we've got a container bar, typically with slushies and delicious drinks. And so it's a really great place to just come and hang out with your friends. And that's really why the O'Shaughnessy started it. On all the bottles, on our logo, On the sides, it'll say Fugit Aura, and that's the O'Shaughnessy family motto of, and it means the hour flies. And especially with starting this company, amidst COVID. I mean, Brian signed on, I think, early 2020. No, it must have been in 2019, I guess. We broke ground on this facility St. Patrick's Day of 2020. So it really, really solidified, spend time with the people you love, hang out with the people you love, share what you love with those that you love, because time flies. Live in the moment, build experiences with your friends and family, and we invite you to come do that here at the distillery.
And you hit that perfectly, right? The Fugit Aura. The reason I say that is Tempus Fugit is sort of a thing for me and my family, and they live in the same thing. This one says, time escapes, and
Mhm.
you're saying the hour escapes.
Mhm.
Um, Whiskey is specifically very much a communal spirit. Some
Absolutely.
spirits aren't quite there, and so it does make a lot of sense for that to be uh, the case, right? And you guys are in Minneapolis, which is also sort of refreshing because it's not the same Kentucky distillery concept that
Mhm.
exists every single place, right? You've got a beautiful facility. I made the mistake, maybe not mistake, I guess maybe that's the wrong word. I had the opportunity to watch a whole bunch of the videos that are filmed inside of your facility right before lunch. And I was like, man, that looks like I am literally several, like a full day's drive away from being able to be there. I'm like, God, that would be a place to be right now, as opposed to
Mhm.
sitting in my office at home. Um, I guess one last question to sort of hang out there. You guys are distilling and barreling up your own product. Are you storing that on site or is that off site? And what is the climate in Minneapolis do to barrels? You already said you had to keep a little bit of heat in the wintertime. Um, have you noticed a difference between that and what you saw from your old elk barrels in the past?
Yeah. I mean, so with Old Elk, we were distilling stuff on site, storing on site, and then we were also getting project product from MGP. And in Colorado, it's a very arid climate, and
Mhm.
so Angel Shares, you got to kind of think of it as osmosis. Water wants to go where it's not. So there, you might put something in the barrel at 110 proof, and it might come out of the barrel at 150 proof. You're going to be losing a lot of water, and it's going to get very concentrated. Here in Minneapolis, or in Minnesota, I should say, um, it's the land of 10,000 lakes. It's super humid in the summer, which I didn't think about when I moved here, and I got
You
here.
weren't ready for it. You're from
I
Colorado, right? This
was,
is no,
I was not ready for it. I was born and raised in New Mexico, spent 11 years in Colorado, and then came to a very humid Midwest. And given we get arid in the winter, um, and normally very cold, except for this winter, it's been very strange.
yeah.
Um, but so yeah, things definitely age differently here than they did in Colorado. We don't see as big of a proof shift, because we do have so much water, so much humidity in the air during the summers. But at the same time, we're only 2.5 years into our maturation, so we don't fully know what we're gonna see. We don't age on site because we just don't have the space. We spent a couple years looking for a good space within the cities to mature our barrels in, and it just wasn't happening for us. So we've partnered with a distillery that's about 2.5 hours northwest of us. And so they store our barrels for us. And I was there just the other week checking on things. I'll be back next month. to check on things. So we are always getting samples and monitoring our maturation. But I guess I'll let you know next year when we release that American pot still, 50/50 mash to really be able to speak to that more.
Yeah, and just to kind of maybe wrap this up. I have an aunt that moved from Kentucky to Minneapolis, and she's been there for a while, and so she was used to the humidity, but not used to the cold, right? And so you went from used to the cold and snow, but not the humidity, right? And so you guys found a place in between, and you probably learned about mosquitoes when you got to Minneapolis
Oh
that
man.
maybe weren't necessarily as prevalent in Colorado or Arizona, for that matter.
Yeah. It's definitely different. I mean, growing up, we would always, being in New Mexico, yes, there are still mosquitoes. Yes, there is still snow. You're at elevation. I mean, my mom's house is at like 3,200 or 6,200 feet. And then we would always go to my family cabin in Colorado, which typically had, plenty of mosquitoes and whatnot. But I think the humidity was the biggest thing.
Big shift.
When I first started here, I was in the process of selling my house in Colorado. So I would come stay, like rent a apartment Airbnb for a week or two, stay here, and then go back. And that first day I was like, oh, well, the distillery is less than a mile from here. I'll just walk. And I did. And I got a ride home.
So you got to bring an extra shirt, maybe it's going to be a different creature.
We hadn't commissioned the equipment yet. And so we were just, doing little odd jobs, and we had gotten a pallet of glass that was cockeyed. And so I was just repalletizing that. And I'm standing in the back, just moving bottles from one pallet to another, just soaked. I mean, just sweating like crazy. It's like, I've never sweat like this before in my life, if I'm like, unless it was playing a sport or, doing something hard. This is just moving bottles from one spot to another. And what did I just sign myself up for?
Yeah, it's hard to tell whether it's sweating or that it's just collecting moisture that's already existing in the air. You're not. It's not really you. It's just what's already there, and you're picking it up. I appreciate the time that you've given me. I have more questions, but I also have to give you the rest of your day back. So I'll leave it with where do we buy Keeper's Heart? Where do we connect with Keeper's Heart? Where do we follow what all's going on?
Absolutely. I mean, you can visit us online at keepersheartwhiskey.com. Follow us on the socials at either Keeper's Heart. Oh gosh, I gotta remember this. I know one of them is OS Distilling. You can follow me personally at Distilling Douglas. And really, if you're in the area, just come see us, because it's a really cool facility, great food, incredible cocktails. We've got most of our single barrels available to try. If you're not in the cities or in Minnesota, we are available in, I think, 23 states. Or if you go to our website, you can, have it delivered, I think, in most states. And it just goes through a couple different third-party places. But definitely check us out, and we'll be happy to share a pour with you.
Yeah, like I said, thank you so much for giving me some time this afternoon. I'm always super appreciative of these conversations.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, John. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode from the Embellish Podcast. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform that you have to be consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod, and give me a follow so you can keep up what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.